All right, thank you everyone for coming to our last workshop, the fall workshop series on incentivizing online volunteers. As I was just mentioning, we are now finally announcing our workshops for the winter 2022 season, starting with teaching experimental methods and then designing your first online experiments. We'll have a presentation on recruiting participants using online ads. And then lastly, at the end of April, getting into spring 2022, we'll have a presentation or a workshop on visualizing data using D3, which is a JavaScript-based library. The links to register for that are forthcoming, so be patient, but you can go ahead and put them in your calendar now. We'll send you a notice when the registration links are live. All right, so let's get started today. I'm gonna go ahead and move this stuff out of the way for myself here. House cleaning. So we're going to first start off with you're just talking about what are incentives. This will be somewhat of a philosophical question, but it's mostly around how should you be thinking about incentivization. It's not just are you paying people or what are you giving people in return, but what are you trying to get them to do prospectively. Once we've sort of gone through the different kinds of incentives there are out there for an individual experiment, we'll talk about two types: monetary rewards and non-monetary rewards. I know that I don't use the word incentives, I use the word reward because what you want to be focusing on is designing an incentive, but then what happens is people do something and they get something in return. So we think that as a reward. And lastly, I'll talk about gamification, what gamification has taught us about how to create rewards that are not involved or not exchange-based, but are more sort of emotional or affective based. So let's get started. Okay, so what do we think of when we think of incentive? Here in the background, I have many different emotions. And what we are trying to do when we incentivize a study or incentivize a participant is we are letting them know before the study starts or sometime during the study, what will happen if they participate or what will happen if they take some action. And what we're trying to do when we create incentives for our study is motivate a person to do the thing that we're incentivizing them to do. So it's participating in the study, starting a study, finishing that study, going in the extra mile to provide us really high quality data. And the way that we do that is we tell them before they do it what they're going to get in return or what they can expect. And so an incentive is about trying to get people to think in the future about the value that they're going to get, that they will create by participating in the study. So an incentive is prospective in that way. Now, I'm going to lay out a typology of incentives focused on this generic definition of a study. A study has a beginning and an end. You start the study, you end the study, and in between you have a sequence or series, or sometimes it can be randomized, so it's not a linear sequence, but a sequence of tasks. This can be answering an individual survey question or answering an entire survey wave. This is a really abstract conception of a study. But what we're going to talk about here is how do you incentivize different parts of this study process. So I want to talk about the first kind of incentive, which is an initiation incentive. So this is the incentive that gets somebody to click the begin study button online. And this is where you are sort of framing the study as, this is what you're doing the study for. It's $10. You'll get $10 for participating, or you're going to help science, or you're going to learn more about yourself. These are all incentives that you can get people to start a study. Now, why would you want to do an incentive, an initiation incentive? So if you're looking at your sort of funnel of where participants are coming in and how many people are participating, if you have a bunch of people who come to a study or see a study but aren't clicking that button, aren't getting started, that's when you want to try to focus on your initiation incentive. So some studies, the study is going to take 2 hours, or the study is requires a special kind of technology. There are a lot of reasons why people may not be inclined to start a study. And so what you can do is go the extra mile in terms of your incentives and say, hey, if you start a study, if you just start the study, we'll give you this. Not if you finish it, but if you just start the study, we'll give you this. Or if you just start the study, this is how you're helping science. So that's the first type of incentive, just getting somebody to start the study, that button. The next type of incentive is a performance incentive. So at each task, we're trying to motivate people or incentivize people to, either give a large amount of effort. So we want them to write a big bunch of text, or we want them to classify many images. We want them to work hard. Another kind of performance incentive is a quality incentive. So we want people to take extra time to do something, or we want them to really sit and think about the responses that they're going to give. The last one, which is really common in economics, is a decision incentive. So we're actually going to give you $1 if you win this game, or if you split up this pot of $100 between yourself and 5 people. However you split it, we're actually going to give you a real $100 to split. So these are all kinds of performance incentives that motivate people to do their best, however you define best, on these individual tasks that you're asking them to do. So an example of this in the image tagging world is giving you 10, especially in Mechanical Turk, giving you 10 cents for every photo you label. One of the big reasons why you would use this is when you have a high attrition rate within a study. So particularly for long studies, and particularly online studies where people will leave because they've got to go to a different window, or things get confusing, or they just can't continue because something's come up. These incentives to keep going through each task can become really critical, really helpful. And so if you're looking at your study, you see, oh, I got a lot of drop off, from stage 1 of the study to stage 2. Then you can create an incentive for people to get from stage 1 to stage 2. You see this a lot with longitudinal studies, and giving high incentives for people to keep coming back. And very often you see people offering larger and larger incentives the further along you go. But this is when you want to think about these performance incentives. The last type of incentive I'll talk about is a completion incentive. So this is this is incentivizing people to get all the way to the end of the study. There are 2 types of completion incentives. One is just a participation incentive. When you participate in the study, you'll get $10. By participating in the study, you'll get access to the research article that we're going to publish based on it. It's an incentive that people qualify for when they finish, and that they get in exchange for finishing. The other type of completion incentive is this sort of marginal completion incentive at the very end, where very often you have people who will start a study, get into it, but then they just won't finish it. They won't bring it to the conclusion or do the last thing that they need to do. We find this happens a lot. In my experience, this happens really frequently with Mechanical Turk in group experiments. People do the empanelment stuff, they'll do the pre-training stuff, and then as soon as they get into a multi-person thing, they go like a round or 2 and then they're out. And it's like the last thing that we need them to do, and for whatever reason they just drop. And so trying to get people to giving them a bonus to get through that last stage becomes really important for us. So this is what we're thinking of when we think of a completion incentive. When you're thinking about this kind of incentive, you are really thinking about this sort of intra-study drop-off at some point during the study. You have a lot of people who are starting it, they're interested in it, they get a couple questions in, and then they're like, this is not really what I want to do. Or again, as with the Mechanical Turk example, they get 90% of the way through, and there's just one last thing we can't get them to do, or can't get everybody to do. This is when you think about the completion incentive. There's a couple of other types of incentives. A lot of these are combinations of incentives. So one is a show up and a completion incentive. So you separately incentivize people to actually fill out or come to the lab or accept the hit. And then you pay them separately or give them an incentive for finishing it. The show up incentive is really good if it's a really big ask, and you want to get people to just hear what you have to say, get going and see how you feel. It also ensures that everybody gets something. So very frequently, and this happens more commonly in the second one here, the screening incentive and participation incentive. People have to do some sort of initial screening task where we want to make sure that they're the kind of person that we want. And sometimes these screening tasks can take a long time. So 10 minutes or 20 minutes to do a psychological inventory to then figure out, do you qualify for the study? So very frequently, you'll have the screening incentive be separated from the participation incentive, in part because the screening incentive or the screening process kicks people out, and you want to be able to incentivize people, whether they get selected for the study or not. Very frequently, you see this in Mechanical Turk, again, where you have people who spend 10 or 20 minutes doing a screening study, and they still need to get paid for that screening study, even if they don't get selected to participate in the full study. A couple of other sort of irregular incentives. One of is a viral incentive. So you see this very frequently in gamified studies, but the idea is you're trying to get people to recruit their friends or recruit other people for your study. And very frequently, this is done through creating something that's shareable. So giving somebody their personality score and then having like a tweet or a Instagram post or something ready for them to share online that says, hey, I'm a narcissist, or hey, I'm really outgoing, or something like that. The last one that is relatively infrequent, because you see this pretty infrequently in studies, is incentives for repeat participation. One of the challenges with repeat participation in incentives is very often incentives can only be used once, so it doesn't work to offer the same incentive over and over again. So you have to think of a different kind of incentive for somebody who comes back over and over again. Again, you see this a lot in citizen science projects, where somebody comes in and they spend maybe an hour translating text or classifying images or folding DNA or folding proteins. But you need them to come back every day or a little bit every week. And so what's the incentive for them to come back and continue to provide data? There we go. So that's so the big picture, thinking about how to structure incentives. We're going to start the study, finish the study, and then incentivize the sequence of tasks that we're asking them to accomplish. Again, you're not going to incentivize every little step, but you'll have to think about what are the things that you care about most that you want to incentivize. So let me talk about monetary incentives. So you have money to provide, or something that is worth sort of a monetary value to provide to participants. What are your options? So I come up with 3 types of monetary incentives. One is direct cash. Now, what makes cash is people can use it for anything. It has a quantified value, so it's $15 or $1.50. It's very clearly valued. A notional monetary incentive is a chance at winning money or a chance at getting cash. So if we're all economists and we're thinking about expected value theory, handing somebody $1 is the same as handing them a 1% chance at $100. But if you're a researcher, it's easier to do a lottery of $100 and give one person $100 than it is to give 100 people a single individual dollar. So I separated out cash and notional monetary incentives. The last one is in-kind gifts. This I consider a monetary incentive in part because you have to pay for it. So you have to actually spend money on it. But there's also a sense of the value of the gift and how expensive that gift is, and what people are earning as a part of participating in terms of gifts. But the advantage to gifts is that it can help you get around cash transfer rules or limitations, or cash transfer processes that in many cases would prevent you from otherwise compensating participants. So let me get into this. So traditionally, when you have the Psych 101 lab or this Econ 101 lab, people are coming in, they participate, they leave, they fill out this form that says, I, Jason Radford, participated in the study, and I hereby earned $10 or what have you, and they write down their student ID. And this is great because it's easy to account for it. You can hand them the $10 bill right there. And you have that paperwork to track that they got paid. Now, when we're doing online experiments, we're able to recruit anybody anywhere in the world, and we can recruit thousands and thousands of people. But the downside is that these people can be anywhere, and it can be difficult to transfer $1 to somebody, even in the United States, if it's going to cost them 50 cents or $1 to just pull money out of a particular app. So what you want to do when doing online payments, when you're trying to do online payments, there's a couple of challenges that you have to just face when thinking about how to give people cash or money. So this transfer logistics, how do I literally get you $1 in your bank account? There's also fees that go along with this. So something like Stripe will charge a 3% fee, but if you're doing foreign transfers and you're trying to give $1 to somebody in China or Nigeria, there's going to be a $35 fee for that person to exchange a single dollar into their local currency. Or if you're doing wire transfers, you get large fees there as well. Receipt and identity verification. This is mostly around university requirements, but very frequently universities require some guarantee that the money made it to the participant. And that you were able to identify that participant as somebody who participated in the study. Typically, you do this by having them provide their email address. And when a participant provides their email address, a sort of implicit identity verification and implicit receipt verification when you then send them a PayPal request or Amazon gift card to that email address. But every university is different, and so you have to work with your university or however you're paying subjects to work out a system that works for their accounting department. So the right solution for how to give folks money depends on the context in the university. As you can see, there's a lot of reasons why people like to use Mechanical Turk, because it handles a lot of this for us, and many universities are familiar with it. Same thing with Prolific. These paid subject pools, because you can sort of get around a lot of this, and how they solve some of these problems for you. But when you're thinking about paying cash online, again, this is why people use paid pools, because you can say, hey, I'm going to pay you $5 for completing this, or I'm going to pay you, $1 for starting the study, and then an extra 50-cent bonus every time you tag an image. So these paid pools can be really good for cash-based incentives from start to finish. If we're thinking outside of Mechanical Turk or Prolific, the next option that everybody goes to is peer-to-peer payment. PayPal is the standard here because it only requires an email address, and people can set it up in less than 5 minutes. You just go to PayPal, put in your email address, answer the email that says that, hey, do you actually own this email, and you're done. So the burden for getting subjects to access PayPal is really low. And then PayPal's fees are relatively small. So if you want to pay random volunteers online, particularly in the US, most people use PayPal. But you can also use things like Venmo and WeChat. And so it goes to the caveat is that the peer-to-peer services that people use for transferring money vary substantially regionally. And different platforms have different costs and foreign exchange fees. And so if you're doing a study with participants internationally, you'll want to research the platforms that are commonly used in the countries that you'll be recruiting from, and what kinds of fees they charge. And you may be able to get folks to use a different platform if the fee structure works. It's okay to ask people to, hey, sign up for this other program in order to get your $5 for participating. So if you're paying people online that are not through Mechanical Turk or Prolific, it's totally fine to use something like PayPal. But just do a little research on what people are actually using. The other thing that's really common are gift cards, typically Amazon gift cards, in part because Amazon delivers most everywhere in the world, or most everywhere in the world is true, not everywhere in the world, however. including China. We've done some recruitment in China, and Amazon's not there. We can't pay with Amazon gift cards. But the great thing with Amazon gift cards for online subject recruitment and compensation is, again, it only requires an email address. Very much like PayPal, all you need to do is upload a bunch of email addresses and say, these people need $10 gift cards, and they'll get an email saying, you got a $10 gift card. The last couple of alternatives, these kind of solve different problems. So one, when you're in a place without complete banking services or good banking services, you can prepay for goods, things like a prepaid cell phone service. So you basically buy minutes on people's phone for them. And so you send them a text message that says, hey, follow this link to get your 100 free minutes this month. But if you're prepaying for goods, that gets around two things. One, transfer fees and foreign exchange fees, but it also obviates the need for them to have a bank from which to pull cash. The other alternative is donating to nonprofits or causes. The issue here is that it's really a pain to try and give somebody $1 or to process 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 individual payments of $1 or 25 cents or whatever it is that you're trying to incentivize. And so what you do instead is offer to donate that money to a cause of their choice, and you give them 3, 4, 5 choices. You say, hey, you earned $3.76 from the study. Who would you like to donate it to? To donate it to, animal shelter or environmental fund or what have you. And then they get to choose where it goes, and they still have earned that monetary incentive. So that's how you go about paying cash to folks online. Related to the sort of last one of aggregating these incentives so that you only have to pay 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 different write 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 different checks is using these notional incentives, which basically are just lotteries. So we'll give you we're doing a drawing for $100, $500, and $1,000. And every time you finish a study, or whenever you finish a study, we'll give you 1 ticket. Or if you start the study, we'll give you a ticket. And if you end the study, we'll give you another 10 tickets. So now you'll have 11 tickets in total from which we're going to draw on for these lotteries. So the idea of these notional incentives is you're still going to give people cash, and you still have to solve the problem of how you want to do that. But it solves two problems. One, you don't have to pay everybody, so you don't have to do hundreds of individual financial transactions. And 2, typically you're trading, or you're sending people large enough, you're writing large enough checks that things like wire transfer fees and other kinds of fees become a smaller percentage of the total winnings or incentive. And so people are much more likely to say, yes, we'll just pay the $35 wire transfer for the $500 lottery prize. So these are really good for few checks that obviate the problem of wire transfer fees. And also you're only working with 3 or 4 people instead of having to figure out how to send 100 different checks to 100 different people. You're only sending 4 checks to 4 people who may be in 4 different countries instead of 100 different countries. The last kind of monetary incentive are these in-kind incentives. Do not discount snail mail. You can still mail people checks or mail them gift cards. Especially in foreign countries, you're still working with foreign exchange rates, but you can at least get the money to them. Even in the form of cash, there are some countries that take American cash. Do you want to put cash in the mail? Probably not, but you can still one possibility. You're also able to send people goods. So with an in-kind incentive, instead of giving somebody $2.50 or having them earn $3.75 in an experiment, you allow them to earn a coffee mug or a t-shirt or something of their choice from an online shop. And what you're able to do here is you can deliver it to them either electronically. So it's a virtual good, like an online game or a subscription to Netflix. Or again, you can mail it to them at their home address. So if you wanted to mail people in Nigeria a coffee mug, you can do that. And you don't have to worry about wire transfer fees. You don't have to worry about whether they have a bank or not. So these are all reasons for using the in-kind incentives when doing an online study. And you pay people equivalently. So people in Nigeria, they get a coffee cup. People in Boston get a coffee cup. So there's an economic equality and in-kind incentives that you don't get with other kinds of monetary incentives. All right, so this is a big sort of referential or reference table, thinking about different kinds of incentives based on the different kind of mode of payment. So just as an example, I'll go through the notional one. Again, these slides will be part of the recording, so you'll be able to come back to these. I'm actually going to add 2 more columns to this based on gamification and non-monetary incentives. So don't feel like you have to write this all down right here. What this is a reference point for you when you're thinking about, I have cash, I need to pay people cash, I need to incentivize decisions. How do I want to do that? What are my options here? So going to the notional one here, if you're trying to incentivize people starting the study, the initiation incentive, you give them tickets for showing up, just for starting the study. You get 5 tickets for the drawing. That means they have to give you their email address up front so that you can give them their 5 tickets, or you can give them the prize if they win it. But they've already got something just by clicking the Start Study button. Incentivizing performance. This marginal performance means for each task you get some sort of reward. So every time you complete a task, we give you X amount of tickets for your effort. If you are doing, if you score really high on your the problem-solving task that we're asking you to do, we'll give you 10 tickets for if you get a perfect score, and 5 tickets if you get 80% right, that kind of thing. Again, very much in the mode of decision economics, we'll give you X tickets per result. So if we're gonna have you split 20 tickets between you and another person. And so how do you want to split those tickets? And then you actually split those tickets. The last thing I mentioned here is the completion. So you get another 10 tickets for finishing the study, or at the very beginning you say, hey, at the end you get a single ticket for participating in the study. Again, this is here as a reference for you to think about how can you use these different kinds of incentives to motivate different kinds of behaviors. Okay, so let's talk about non-monetary incentives. Now we're making good time, which is good. So non-monetary incentives are not only good when you don't have cash, because a lot of researchers don't have funding for subject payments, but it also gets us to think about other ways of incentivizing participant behavior beyond just money. Sometimes I think that we use money as a replacement for thinking thoroughly about what participants actually want and what's going to motivate them to actually do the things that we want them to do. It allows us to create really boring experiments, because we say, hey, just do this boring thing and we're going to pay you $10. And a lot of people do it because $10 is $10. But I think we can actually go a lot further in the science that we do if we think about how do we motivate people to participate in a study, or how do we build a study that people find worth investing themselves in, worth trying, or worth doing their hardest for. So to get at this, I'm pulling actually this motivation to volunteer inventory from psychology. There are a couple of different ways of thinking about what makes people want to volunteer. This is one of the classic ones. And there are seven dimensions. So the first is values, that people do it because it's the right thing to do. Frequently, we use this at Volunteer Science as a, do this for science, do this to advance human knowledge, do this to solve such and such a problem. But the idea here that people do it because it's the moral right thing to do. The next motivation is understanding. somebody wants to learn more about a topic or learn more about science in general, or well, I guess learn about themselves is sort of an enhancement thing, but people are here to learn. So hopefully we'll start to see, you know, there are different kinds of incentives that you can build, which we'll talk about in a minute. But there are different kinds of incentives that you can build around these values. The next one is social. People just want to interact with one another. They want to make friends. They want to, you know, laugh and have fun with other people. So that's another reason for volunteering. The next one is career. And this is sort of a weird one, I think, that the idea that participating in a scientific study is going to further my career. But there are actually ways of doing this that I'll talk about in a minute. Protective. So this makes me feel good about myself. You know, sometimes I feel down. Sometimes, you know, I've made a mistake, or sometimes, you know, I just feel like I haven't done anything worthwhile with my time. And so I want to feel better about myself. I want to do something good for the world. I want to feel like a good person. That's the protective motivation. You know, I want to do something good. I want to make myself feel good. The last one is enhancement. So this will actually make me a better person. I'm going to learn something. I'm going to get a skill. I'm going to, you know, add value to myself in some way. Human capital, social capital, network capital, what have you. But I'm going to make myself better by participating in this study. Now, you know, all of these, as I said, are not tangible, one-to-one, you get $10 for participating rewards. These are things that people perceive about themselves in the study that they're participating in. So let's think about some examples here. So values, people want to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. You can send them a thank you letter that says, you know, thank you for participating. This is how your participation impacted our science or impacted this problem that we're studying. Access to the final article or sending people a copy of the final article is another way of getting at this. It lets people see the impact of what they've done. And then impact tracking. So if you're doing something like tagging a bunch of images, you can let people know that, you know, so we had a study where people were tagging images of people's eyes to try and diagnose diabetes, or at least they were doing, there's a sort of proof of concept scientific study where we were trying to see if, you know, a crowd of novices, you know, could accurately diagnose diabetes using these images of eyes. And so, and this one was actually a mechanical Turk study, but in that same kind of study with volunteers, what we would say is, you know, you've categorized 10 images or 20 images or 30 images, you know, and that's, you know, taken us 10% of the way towards this study on whether people can, whether we can actually provide, you know, diagnostic services to places and people who don't have access to optometrists or ophthalmologists who could actually do this as experts. So let's go top to bottom and then to the right, top to bottom. So understanding. So again, this is about learning more about the world, learning more about themselves. Again, access to the final article, sending people a copy of the final article is a good way of, you know, helping expand their understanding of the subject that they're participating in. One of the problems with access to the final article is it often takes a couple of years for the final article to come out. It even takes, you know, 6 to 12 months for the, you know, preprint, you know, version of an article to be done. So I tend to, you know, discourage people from using final article as one of the things, because people typically don't deliver on it, or by the time they do, they've, you know, lost the list of email addresses. The thing that we actually like the most are access to related research. So when people are done, you send them a copy of, you know, either a study that you've done previously, sort of in the same general area, or you send a copy of another article from a related researcher in the same topic. And what that does is allow people to learn more, you know, at the level of a scientist, what is being studied, what is known about the thing that they're participating in. You can also do an event with the PI where you give a lecture about your research or something related to those who participate. Another thing that people like. Social, so providing social events for folks, a networking event afterwards, in this PI event where people can chat with one another as another good type of non-monetary reward. It only costs your time to set that up. For studies that are a bit more ongoing, creating a community of participants using like a message board or an email list or something that allows folks to talk to one another and hear from one another as another way of getting people rewarded or incentivizing people to participate using that social value or social motivation. Also, a meet the researcher event where they can ask you questions and where you can meet them or they can be met, right? Is another thing that helps to leverage the social motivation. On the career side, I'm going to get you one that you just want to think about. So very often people are participating in studies that they know something about. So it's, they're an accountant and there's a study about accounting, or they are a community activist who's participating in a political science study. So allowing folks to network with one another or with the researcher as a part of the study or as a result of the study is one way of doing this, giving people access to folks in their industry. For long-term studies or studies that require a lot of work, giving people actual formal volunteer hours that they can report on their resume can be a really good and really motivating kind of reward. So, people spend, let's see, the human forecasting competition, the Good Judgment Project, ended up taking something like 20 to 40 hours a week of some of these, like what we call super forecasters, people who spent a lot of time, got really good at forecasting future events. And many of them actually end up getting jobs based on the skills that they developed and the hours that they put in, and actually they were part of some of the publications. So if you have a scientific study where you're recruiting participants and participants are doing substantial amounts of work, particularly high skilled work, that counts as volunteer hours that they can put on their resume. The last thing I'll note is expert training. So if you are doing a particular study in a particular area, you are an expert in that area, and you as a faculty member, teach folks how to do something in your area. And so you can offer that kind of training to people. So you can offer an hour-long workshop on statistical analysis or an hour-long workshop on American government or what have you. These are all things that people can, I don't necessarily put on their resume, but helps advance their career goals. One thing I'll note too, especially with career, is that not everybody is going to have the same career goals, and it's not going to be the same kind of motivator for everybody. This is true of all of these non-monetary rewards. This is one of the advantages of having monetary rewards, is that $10 means $10 to everybody. Some people have more money, and so $10 is marginally less useful, but at least it means the same. This is not the case here with non-monetary rewards. The protective. So this is when people just need to feel good about themselves. So sending them a thank you letter, personal thank you letter that says, "Hey, Jessica, thank you so much for participating in this research. I see that you really helped us, and that really was meaningful to us." An impact statement, so going deeper into how participating in the research and the study itself can change or solve a problem, change the world or solve a problem. And again, impact tracking, showing people how much they've accomplished through their participation. Enhancements, so this is being a better person, learning new things. So this can be sort of a skills measurement. So giving people a psychology questionnaire, personality questionnaire, and giving them their results back as a part of this enhancement. Teaching people a little bit about themselves. Again, expert training also fits in here, just giving people more skills to do whatever it is that they want to do in the world. Okay, again, a reference table here. I think this one is, oh yeah, so these are just taking some of these tactics here, the expert training, impact tracking, and then putting them into the kinds of incentive boxes that we want. So initiation, give somebody a copy of the final paper whenever it comes out when they start. So as soon as you press the begin study button, we're going to collect your email address and we're going to send you a copy of the final paper when we're done. or you're going to receive an invitation to a talk by the PI. Performance incentives can be a little bit tricky here because it's difficult to turn these non-monetary incentives into marginal incentives. But at least with marginal incentives and effort incentives, you can do this certificate and impact tracking where you're saying, hey, what we do in volunteer science is we tell people how much money they save for science. So every study is about $5 worth. And so every time they do a study, it adds $5 to their impact. So by the time they've done a couple of different studies, they've saved $50 or $100 for science. But it lets them know that they really advanced science through their effort. For competitive incentives, you want people to do well in competition with one another. You do special events for those who win the competition. For something decisive, you give people a special article based on whether they sort of win the decision or not. On the completion side, impact letter to get people to participate in general or complete. Special events for those who make it all the way through, or certificates of completion for people who make it all the way through. Again, you don't have to write it all down. I will, this is going to be one more column from gamification that I'll get to in a minute. And again, this is all for reference. All right, so caveats with these non-monetary incentives. First, people respond to many motivations, not just one. So you don't have to use just one, but you should make it explicit. You should think specifically, like if I'm going to use the career incentive or career incentive, how is that actually going to work? How do I generate certificates, or what kind of skills training can I do that's actually going to pay off here? Different motivations also map on to different studies. So as I mentioned earlier, we had this, I think about it a lot because we have done it. We did a study that was looking at knowledge among accountants. And so a part of the study was, after the study, we gave people an actual little class on this particular thing that this accounting professor was studying. And so we're really focusing on that career motivation for them and the understanding motivation. They were going to sort of upskill by participating in the study and learn about this particular problem in accounting. So pick the ones that work for your study and recruitment method and your sample. Some combinations will be more conducive than others. Especially with non-monetary incentives, these are rewards, not compensation. So the idea of compensation is that somebody has taken on a loss and you need to make them whole. Frequently, we think of this in the monetary incentives, right? We're going to pay you $10 for your time. Like you've lost 30 minutes, so you've lost an hour. And we very often think about this for Mechanical Turk, right? You're going to spend 5 minutes and we're going to pay you for 5 minutes worth of time. You don't have that sense here because you can't just put a price tag on accessing an event or accessing an article. Well, like I said, you can't put a price tag on accessing an article. There's a market value for that. But you're not giving people, you're not paying off a debt. People are earning access to a reward when you're doing non-monetary compensation, or sorry, non-monetary incentives. Lastly, you should also be aware of uneven access. So if you're going to do an event or you're going to do something that requires access to broadband, you want to make sure that people who aren't able to access it because of a lack of technological capabilities can still watch a recording or have something of equivalent value. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn to the last leg here, which is gamification, which I hope that most folks were rolling their eyes because it was a big craze a while ago, and it's, I think it's matured. I think I see the hype cycle, right? It's kind of, gets to this peak and then it calms down, but then it settles into, I think, the kind of, it settles into the ecosystem where it belongs. And I think this has happened with gamification. So back in the early aughts through even I think the mid-teens, a lot of experiments and a lot of other sort of behavioral platforms, not just behavioral experiments. We're going through this gamification craze where we're giving everybody points and creating leaderboards for everything, and everything looked really fun and interesting. And the idea was by making things really fun and interesting and giving people points that they can use to track their progress, would motivate them to do the things that we're wanting them to do. So in this case, this is an example of Fold It, where people are folding proteins, trying to find optimal, what's it called? What are they? Anyway, the optimal configurations. I can't remember what makes them optimal. Find optimal configurations of proteins. And there was a period in which we tried to make everything into games. And volunteer science actually came out of this, this historical moment. Volunteer science was originally a platform for creating games for science. And a lot of our early experiments are written as games. And we still have a lot of gamification elements to volunteer science. And a part of this is that gamification actually is a completely separate set of incentives. It's not an exchange incentives where an incentive where somebody gets something in return for something else or as a result of something else. This is much more of an effective or an emotional incentive. The reason that you play a game is because it makes you happy, or because it's thrilling, or it gives you a sense of mastery and completion, or it creates a sense of wonder. There is this just aesthetic motivation for doing the gamified activity and for getting better at it, finishing it. Again, hitting all of the steps in the incentivization process. So the incentive system in gamification is emotion, basically, as opposed to these sort of higher level cognitive desires for doing the right thing or for advancing your career. The tools for use here in gamification are your points, badges, achievements, levels, so progressively getting harder, or different kinds of different variants on the gameplay, special challenges, leaderboards, so you can measure yourself against others. That gives you some of that social feedback. Scores, so you know how well you did. You can compare yourself to your previous scores. But also narrative, so people get to learn more about a story, or there's a story for people to hear in the first place. So these are all, I think, again, the tools or tactics for gamification. Now, what do we learn from gamification? So these effective rewards are different and distinct from the other kinds of incentives. And what I mean by that is, you can use them with monetary and non-monetary rewards, but they're leveraging a different sort of dimension of motivation, which is just the joy or that visceral pleasure of doing a thing. Generally, however, these points or badges don't work in isolation. There's a lot of design that goes into making these things engaging just intrinsically. And scientists typically don't have the skill set or the money to put into that kind of design. So what we need to do as scientists is, instead of having these high quality designs and these very well thought through game loops, for example, is that we tie these rewards to the things that people care about. So we can design an experiment that is gamified and that is sort of a standalone incentivized experiment that totally still happens. But for most researchers, the points add up to attendance at a PI event, or the points, or you get a badge that says that you have earned your 20th volunteer hour. These tools for gamification tie back to sort of the underlying incentives that scientists frequently use. The other thing I think that we learned from gamification is how to tie the study mechanics to incentives. So everything that somebody's doing in a study is a mechanic, whether it's answering a question, tagging an image. All of these activities that we're asking people to do can be tied to an incentive. Thank you, Don. This was thank you for the for coming. What we should be thinking about as scientists is how do we do this more effectively, and how do we do this more prospectively? How do we think more systematically about the ways in which our incentives are tied to the kinds of things that we want people to do, and how do we make sure that these are tied together more closely? Again, I think most researchers think, I'm just going to give somebody, X thing for finishing the study. And that's good. That is a very specific kind of incentive. But there are a lot of other ways of getting people to engage with the study from beginning to end. So there we go. All right, so going back to the gamification elements in this sort of reference chart, when you want people to start a study using gamification, you give them a character or identity. You place them in the game itself. You can also sort of advance the narrative or initiate a narrative. So you give them a story. And a part of this can be the scientific story. But you give them a sense that by engaging in the game, they're going to learn about a mystery, or explore a thriller, or be part of a drama, even if it's completely fabricated fiction. These are performance incentives. This is, I think, where we get to sort of the meat of gamification. We've learned a lot about incentives and behavior. So this marginal incentive, where every time you do something, you get something back. You get ranks or badges. So you as a person level up as you do more and more marginally. Effort. So the more you do, or the better, the higher quality of the data that you provide, the more points you earn. So you get more points for being completely accurate and less points for being somewhat accurate. Same thing for decisions. You can also use points, but you can give people an award for winning a decision. So like with a prisoner's dilemma, they get an award if they resist the urge to defect, or they get an award for getting the least amount of jail time, if you will. For those of you who know that particular experiment. Again, competitive, this is what scores and leaderboards are for. And then completion, so you give people an achievement for finishing a study, or every time they complete it, you give them that narrative advance. You close off the story, or you show them the ending, you let them know how it went. So even if you're doing some very basic survey, so we're doing a survey right now on household chores, and what we can do is at the very beginning of the study have this narrative about this married couple who's having a fight over splitting up their chores. Did they do the study? I don't know if I want to do it something that specific, but when they're done, we end the story by saying, and they identified the problems in their relationship, and they resolve their problems, and we're over. But the idea here is that when completing the study, they close off the narrative. You can also give them a results page. So here's how you did. Here's all the points you earned, the new ranks, the new badges, the new awards. Here's how you landed on the leaderboard, that kind of thing. Much more common. All right. Again, I'm not gonna dwell on this thing because it's huge. This is all for reference. If you're watching the recording of this, you can just pause it. If you want a copy of this, you can feel free to email me. Again, it's jason_radford@volunteerscience.com. I think we're also going to be putting this up on the blog, so you'll have a copy there as well. But this just gives you a sense of, here are all of your options for the incentives that you can offer for different kinds of behaviors that you want to incentivize. So when you have a study, you don't have cash, but you want to incentivize people to make certain kinds of decisions, you can say, hey, you'll send them an article based on whether they place high in the decision or what have you. All right, so concluding thoughts. Again, you don't have to incentivize every step. You just, I think it could be too complicated to provide an incentive for everything. And so in some ways, maybe the incentive can get in the way of the study. But you really want to focus on incentivizing the things that you care about the most and are most problematic for your study. If people aren't starting the study, create an incentive for them to start. If they're not finishing, create an incentive for them to finish. You don't need to make this too complex for a simple survey. So Incentivizing performance probably doesn't relate for a 5-minute survey where you just want somebody to finish. Especially when you're doing a simple task. We're volunteer science. Our volunteers aren't paid, or at least we don't assume that they're going to get paid. So leaning on those non-monetary incentives and say, hey, if you take the survey, it's going to help solve this problem out in the world. That's all you need. You don't have to have a complex incentive system. But again, you should incentivize the behavior you want to motivate. Completion, effort, making a salient decision or making that decision in a valid way. You want to explicitly match that incentive to one motivation. So you want to pick something, right? You don't want to just sort of throw something at the wall and say, well, people who are interested in a career are going to read this way, and people who are interested in understanding are going to read it this way. Be clear in the value you're trying to tap into. And lastly, beware coercion. So we talk about this a lot in monetary incentives, that we pay people too much. You give them too much money, they can't say no. But that can also be the case in some of the more material and non-monetary incentives. So gifts can be coercive. Access to career opportunities and networking opportunities can be coercive, particularly if you're working for an employer, and then you're doing a study at a particular organization, and one of the rewards is some sort of networking event. That can be kind of coercive. So just be careful of how your incentives affect your participants and sort of limit their autonomy. I think that's probably one of the biggest flags when thinking about incentives in general. All right, so that's the end of the fall workshop series. Thank you all for coming, and for those of you who've come to multiple workshops. I want to let you know again that we have our winter workshops coming up. The first one in January is going to be teaching experimental methods, designed for folks who are teaching undergrads, grad students, whether you want to do just one day on experimental methods or the entire semester. We have some pointers for you. After that, we're going to be talking about designing your first online experiment. So we'll talk about experimental design, just the basics of how do you randomize and what counts as randomization, all the way up to recruiting workers on Mechanical Turk using online ads, where you actually get those people from. Then we'll talk about online ads specifically. So how do you get anyone from around the world for cheap using online ads? This is about making sure that you get the subjects that you want without breaking your budget. So we'll talk about that in March. And lastly, in April, we're going to talk about visualizing data using D3. This will be focused on taking the data that you do in an online experiment and creating visualizations. So elements in a page that you can actually interact with. If you need any help, please contact me again by email as jason_radford@volunteerscience.com. The links for these events are not quite yet up, but when they are, they will be on volunteerscience.com/events. Again, thank you for coming. I'm going to end the recording now. There we go.